Greetings and salutations, my name is OJ as always, and welcome back to another episode of the DBDathon, a series of videos where I go over every single killer in Dead by Daylight, from Trapper all the way up to the now not so recently and released Springtrap. I go over their lore, aka just reading off their in-game bio, their power and gameplay, their perks, teachable perks I mean, and their design / my favourite and least favourite cosmetics for them. And today's object of obsession is Charlotte and Victor Dyers. Dyers? No, it's Dyer. Their last name's really hard to say. I had to search it up, but I think it's Dyer. Close enough, right? Either way, Victor and Charlotte, also known as the twins. As I do in all of these videos, I would like to start by reading off their in-game bio, as, to no one's surprise, I am not a lore guy, at least not for Dead by Daylight. If you're looking for more in-depth readings of their lore, etc., I would suggest going to someone like Pixelbush, who does really good lore videos on, Dead by Daylight. But, with that said, their in-game bio reads as such. A pair of conjoined twins, Charlotte and Victor Dyer, formed an emotional bond like none other. The unlikeliness of their successful birth in the 17th century could be described as miraculous, yet it immediately brought about their life of persecution. The twins emerged with Victor's lower body affixed to the chest of his sister, legs twisted around her muscles and organs. He was smaller than Charlotte, grown as if he were an appendage of her body rather than a fully formed boy. As the newborns screeched, so too did the midwife who delivered them, running from the home, yelling of a demon birthed by a witch. So began the hunting of Charlotte, Victor, and their mother, Madeline. The coming years were fleeting memories for the twins, yet they were the closest thing to a normal life they would know. The journey with their mother was what they believed all children underwent, the games of running and hiding through France's countryside being an ordinary occurrence. At the age of 5, a new challenge to the game was presented as their mother fell ill. Pale and exhausted, Madeline had no choice but to pass responsibility of collecting food onto Charlotte. The girl, burdened under extra clothing that concealed Victor's protruding body, set out from the forest tent and marched to the nearby town. Though a peculiar sight, she did what she had been trained for, waiting for an opening at the market and swiping whatever food she could. It was a victory in the game, but one short-lived. After midnight, glowing flames surrounded the family's encampment, bobbing through the darkness. A single commanding shout broke the night's silence, and a mob of witch hunters streamed in. Grubby hands tore the twins from their bed, Charlotte frantically kicking all who approached. Madeline cried for her children, her voice abruptly silenced by a club to her skull. Victor shrieked, the wailing of a trapped rat. The hunters coordinated quickly. A judge on hand declared Madeline guilty of witchcraft, evidenced by her demon spawn. Within minutes, they shackled her unconscious body to a tree, surrounding her feet with dry twigs and moss. As she awoke, she did not struggle, only begged her children to turn away. They would be given no choice. The twins were forced to watch as the torch was lit, and they watched as flames leapt up their mother's skirt, charring and sizzling her flesh. They watched as fat dripped from her body, as her face bubbled and twisted. They watched until the screams that tore her vocal cords were no more, and all that was left was the crackling of embers and a nauseating scent. Whatever joy and goodness were in them died with their mother. Caged and transported to an old wooden temple, they were sold to a secretive group, clad in dark cloaks. Victor reacted with the ferocity of a rabid beast at any who approached, clawing and biting. The only solace that could calm him was the embrace of his sister, Charlotte. Bitter and hateful to all but her brother, found purpose in being his protector. Within the temple, they were exposed to unusual experiments, some cruel, many simply baffling. One day, they would be made to break the neck of a small grey bird. The next, they would bleed their fingers into a vase of roses. Every 7th day, they would sleep with the branch of a damp oak beneath their pillow. Then there was the chanting, a never-ending chorus from cloaked figures on scheduled intervals. In time, a final experiment was planned. 2 robed figures herded the twins to the center of the temple, holding Charlotte upon an altar in a room lit with candelabras. The wrinkled face of a man peered from under his hood, placing a hand on the forehead of each twin, making careful examinations of their skulls. "Memento mori," he uttered, as he withdrew a shining blade. Charlotte rolled to her side, shifting her brother off of the altar. With a screech, he stretched his arm as far as he could, knocking a candelabra to the ground. The flames took to the dry wood immediately. They swept over the floor, igniting the black robes that brushed against it. Screams of agony pierced the chaos, invigorating Charlotte. She dashed through the inferno, vision concealed with nothing but black smoke and blazing flame. A painful heaviness filled her lungs. No exit could be found, every step leading to overwhelming heat. She fell to her knees, suffocating, and then saw it. Sunlight. Trees. She stumbled from the fire into the dewy grass. Without looking back, she ran into the forest until she collapsed. When Charlotte opened her eyes, she reached for Victor's hand. He made no attempt to budge. His body hung helplessly from her torso. She clasped his face, stared into his sad, still eyes. The movements she was accustomed to. His body pulling at her skin, his legs prodding at the cavity in her chest, were no more. Victor was dead. Charlotte had no choice but to continue moving as she mourned, fearing black cloaks and witch hunters were prowling. She concealed her brother's corpse under her clothing and marched for the sewer of a nearby city. There, she set up camp, emerging often to steal whatever food she could, resorting to raiding barns for pig slop when desperation set in. Throughout the years, Victor's corpse rotted as his limbs oozed and blackened, yet his body demonstrated resistance to complete decomposition, as if his sister's blood still coursed through him. Protecting his lifeless body became Charlotte's sole reason for being, refusing to ever be separated from the only family she had left. Life into her teenage years was a game of survival. Her hatred for humanity grew each day under the realization they would never leave her be. No matter how many died during her botched robberies and desperate attempts to escape, they would always be more to pursue her, and sling words of condemnation at her. Monster, demon, witch, and it was the Black Cloaks who were the worst of them. Their hunt for her was unending, forcing her to constantly abandon shelter and run. For years, Charlotte fled drawing blood out of necessity, cradling her long-dead brother in the night. During a frigid winter, her body began to break down. Food was scarce, and the refuge of a rickety shack were no use against the freezing temperatures. Sickle in hand, she sheltered near her campfire in the woods, not knowing if the Black Cloaks would have taken her before the cold did. As frost crystallized around her nose and her lips took on a gentle blue hue, Charlotte felt something she had never experienced. Acceptance. She closed her eyes, opening herself to the serenity of death, when a shriek, shrill and vicious, pierced her ears. Victor spasmed and flailed from her chest, a cloud of fog encompassing him. Before she could react, he spilled from her in a bloody puddle, landing on the snow and running. Pulling herself from the edge of death, she gave chase. Calling his name, she ran through the forest until her legs could hardly carry her, until finally, within her view was Victor, sitting at the edge of a thick fog. His face, twisted and feral, screamed as a dark hooded figure emerged from the fog, grabbed his arm and seized him. The serenity that had crept into Charlotte was extinguished, replaced with the seething hatred and rage she had depended on for so long. With a tight grip on her sickle, she charged into the fog, preparing to eviscerate any who set foot near her brother. Now, I'm going to be real with you guys. The twins are not my favourite. They are the killer. Like, if you were to put every single killer in a tier list of how I feel about them, they would sit smack bang in the middle, at the middle of the middle. I feel no strong feelings for them whatsoever. I don't particularly care too much for them, and I want you to know that going into this video, just so, or when I say going into this video, we're already 10 minutes in, you know what I meant. Their words, they're really difficult, aren't they? Ignoring that, their lore is pretty good. It's another case of a tragic killer, and I do think it's a interesting concept for conjoined twins to be a killer. That's a really interesting concept. A lot of the stuff that Charlotte and Victor do on paper sounds awesome. It's a real... Okay, I don't want to call it body horror. That feels really, really ableist. Whoa, okay, ignore that I just said that. I just think... How do I word this without sounding really, really bad? I just think conjoined twins in horror games is a really cool idea. How do I... Outlast did a lot of it, right? Outlast 2 were they conjoined twins? I think they were conjoined twins, the one in Outlast 2. And funny enough, Outlast Trials, his new prime asset, are conjoined twins as well. I don't want to say it leads into body horror, because it is a real condition that some people have to deal with, and I don't think people would be very happy saying, oh, you're horrific to look at. But do you kind of get what I'm saying? Do you kind of, like, it lean... How am I... You know what I'm trying to say, right? I think conjoined twins is a cool driver for horror. It's a cool idea, and I think Charlotte and Victor are a cool idea. That's kind of how I feel. I'm really rambling today. Anyways, let's actually focus on what I'm meant to be talking about, which is their lore. Their lore is another example of a tragic killer. It's sad. I don't feel too strongly about their lore. I don't feel too strongly about, pardon me, them. Just kind of full stop. Their lore is fine. It's good. It's solid. It's okay. It's whatever word that sounds mildly positive, but isn't like super... positive you could think of. I'll just apply it to these two, right? Anyways, enough with my random rambling. I'm scattered everywhere for this video, right? Because I don't particularly care about them too much, but that's just... These are my videos. These are how I feel about these killers, so it usually gets reflected in how I talk about them, how much I actually care about them. I'm sure anyone that watched the Blight video can see that I really, really cared about the Blight, and I really, really liked him. So yeah, if you're coming to this as a Twins fan, I don't think you're going to be particularly happy with me. But anyways, with that said, let's move on to their gameplay / their power. Now, as their condition would imply, do we call it a condition? This video is really hard to tiptoe around, right? Either way, you play as both Charlotte and Victor simultaneously, in a sense, kinda. Not simultaneously, but you play as both of them. Charlotte herself is relatively simple. She is a M1 killer. She doesn't do anything special. She is literally just a M1 killer. She is like Trapper without his traps. I don't know how else to put it. However, when pressing the power button, you're allowed to unbind Victor and take control of him, where you are in a much smaller state. By the way, when you enter Victor, Charlotte goes like sort of dormant. She kind of like deactivates. She's like a turned off robot or something. She suppresses her terror radius and red stain, which is, you know, kind of cool. And when you play as Victor, you not only shrink down and are in first person view of Victor, you're far faster, you are unable to see scratch marks, you can see pools of blood in a brighter sense. He can attach himself onto lockers to prevent survivors from getting out, basically getting a free hook state for Charlotte. When you switch back to Charlotte from Victor, you are allowed to see killer instincts of anyone near Victor. When still playing as Victor though, you can charge up a pounce, which allows you to kind of fly towards the survivor, and if you hit them, you attach onto them, make them suffer the broken status effect, and if they are already injured, he'll down them. If he misses a pounce, he will be left vulnerable for a couple of seconds, and in that state, survivors can punt him. They can give him a right boot to the face, which is kind of funny. It's not meant to be funny. He's like a little child, right? We're punting him in the face. It's not funny, but it is kind of funny. Yeah, that's basically how their power works. When Victor is attached to someone, though, the survivors can kind of lob him off after a while, or if they get help from a teammate, they'll, you know, lob him off. But their power is quite interesting. Again, on paper, they're such a weird killer to talk about. I would be remiss, by the way, if I didn't mention that when this killer came out, they were a broken, buggy mess. And they were a broken, buggy mess for so many years. Until Judgment Day, as I would like to call it, when they received their massive wave of buffs on the PTB and instantly shot up to being the strongest killer in the game, bar none. There was a reason that none of those buffs made it to the live server. However, the good thing about that PTB is that they had most of their bugs and weird issues sorted out. Not all of them, they're still kind of buggy, still kind of clunky. And I think that's actually the reason I don't like them very much, is because they feel quite clunky to play as. The swap between the two of them isn't very smooth, and when you play as Victor, Charlotte's just kind of standing somewhere else on the map, so you can run around as Victor and not find anyone, and then you just wasted a bunch of time. But that's probably a skill issue on my part. I don't know, I feel like Charlotte should have something else, because otherwise she's just an M1 killer, and that's really boring. I don't know what she would do, right? But it's just kind of boring. It's just, again, it just on paper they look cool. They're conjoined twins. You can play as both of them, but in practice they're not fun to play. At least not for me. They feel weird. They feel clunky. They feel boring. It really upsets me as well because I want to like them. There's a few killers in this series of videos who I want to like, but I just can't for one reason or another. I just feel like I can't, and Twins falls into that category. You'll notice as we move on through these videos, we'll start to get to more controversial killers with a bit more history to them, a bit more talk about them. I feel like the Twins are one of them. They're very strong. They're a very strong set of killers, right? They usually sit around like an A tier range, which is good because the only people in S tier are Nurse and Blight, and the Ghoul for a while when he was on PTB, right? And some would argue that he still sits in there too. But yeah, they are strong. I just do not enjoy playing them. They feel clunky. They feel slow. I mean, I had kind of a bit of fun playing them in the games in the background because, you know, I'm on my PC and I haven't really played most of these killers, right, in these videos, the footage I record. It's my first time playing them on my PC. And it was kind of fun to play as them in that, but yeah, no, I'm not very fond of their gameplay loop, and yeah, maybe some of you guys can relate to what I'm on about. I mean, they're not very popular, right? I think their pick rate is in like the bottom 5 or something, so it's clear that some people do agree with me that they're just not very enjoyable to play. But then again, this is no shade to Victor. If you like Victor and like Charlotte and Victor, like the Twins, no shade to you whatsoever, but I just personally do not like them. But anyways, with that said, we move on to their teachable perks. The first of said teachable perks is known as Hoarder, with a description reading as such: you protect what little you have and are attentive to any disturbance of your stockpiles. Survivors reveal their location when they interact with a chest or when they pick up an item within 32, 48 or 64 meters of your location. The trial begins with up to 2 additional chests in the environment, and for some reason there's no flavor text. This perk's very bad. It's just really bad. Oh boy, I'm giving survivors more items. Woo! What? This perk helps survivors more than it does you. They 64, like, I'm not kidding when I say this should be map wide. It is 64 meters. Sounds like a lot, but it's really not. When you know that most killer terror radiuses are around the I want to say 30-ish mark. I think it's about 30-ish mark. I don't know what theirs is, but like the Twins specifically, but I would presume around the 30, 40-ish mark. This just sucks. This perk just sucks. It kind of got a bit of extra oomph because of Dracula, because he had a perk where it makes it so survivors' auras are revealed around chests. But this perk just sucks. It gives survivors more items. And for what negative? Like, I'm sorry, giving them more items. This perk should be just hemorrhaging them, exhausting them, like, not just revealing their location whenever they interact with a chest or pick up an item. Like, the pick up an item part could be good, but even then, still bad. Still very bad perk. Anyways, with that said, let's move on to their second perk. Thankfully, said second perk is Oppression, which has a description reading as such: life has been difficult for you, so you'll make it difficult for others. When you damage a generator, up to 3 other random generators also begin regressing. If the affected generators are being repaired, any survivors repairing them receive a difficult skill check. Oppression has a cooldown of 60, 50 or 40 seconds, which actually does have flavor text reading: damn them as they would damn us. a quote from Charlotte Dies. I still don't know how to say their last name. Anyways, this perk I do like. I am quite fond of this perk. Relatively fond of it, right? You kick a gen and 3 other gens start regressing. It's simple, it's fun. It used to be really bad because it had a cooldown of like 80 seconds, which is insanely long for not too much value. It sounds like a lot, right? 3 gens regressing at the same time? Sure. But most survivors can do difficult skill checks, so if they're actively repairing the ones that start regressing, it doesn't really matter. I just like kicking it because it gets map-wide regression. And I think it can be fun when using it in like a gen kicking build with Eruption or what's it called, Dragon's Grip, and Nowhere to Hide, etc. But anyways, I think the perk's pretty alright, pretty neat. I'm fond of it, but it's obviously not the best in the world. There's better gen regression perks, a lot of them as well. But anyways, with that said, we move on to their third perk. Said third perk is Coup de Grace, which has a description reading as such. As the end nears, you go in for the kill. Each time a generator is completed, Coup de Grace grows in power, gains 2 tokens with a maximum of 5 tokens, and you can consume 1 token to increase the distance of your next lunge by 70, 75 or 80%. This also does not have any flavor text for some reason. This is a really good perk. Really good, really fun perk. Very, very fun. I am quite fond of the mechanic behind it. You do have to lose the game to get value out of it. However, said value can catch people off guard. They do not expect a killer to suddenly fly across the map holding their weapon high in the air for a good 4 seconds just to hit someone. It can make looping areas like jungle gyms or the shack so much easier, and it's especially good on specific killers such as the clown. The clown gets a lot of benefit from it. Oh well, anyone who just basic attacks for all of their damage can get a lot of benefit from it. And the funniest part about it is that I think it stacks with the Houndmaster perk, where if you fall you get 75% lunge distance. So you can have a lunge that has an increased distance of I think 155%, which is really funny and very fun to do, though it is a little bit hard to perform. It's a good perk, it's a fun perk as well, which is a rarity. A lot of the good perks are usually not very fun to use. They're usually quite offhands, you know what I mean, you don't actually have to interact with the game for them to get value. But this is one that you do. I mean, you have to lose the game to get value from it, but I know you have criticised that in the past, but its reward is relatively good, and it's also very fun to use. But anyways, with that said, we move on to their design and their favourite, or my favourite, and least favourite cosmetics for them. Now, as I said earlier, I am quite fond of the idea of conjoined twins as a killer, and their base design does a decent enough job at kind of portraying that in a sense. The clothing that Charlotte wears is quite ragged, dirty, kind of old as well, because they are from 17th century France, which was not a pretty time, I will tell you that. But the outfit is simple, and that makes sense considering what we read in her lore. She had to scrounge for food at all times. She lived out in the middle of Nowheresville, and Charlotte herself is quite large. She's almost masculine in a sense, and that also kind of makes sense because she obviously had to live and survive off of everything she could find and get her hands on. And it also makes sense because she would need some form of physical strength come into the entity's realm, right? Because I mean, obviously the entity can just buff people. They buff the Legion, right? A bunch of teenagers would get their asses kicked by Leon Kennedy, but they get buffed with extra strength and speed. So yeah, Charlotte probably falls under a similar category. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, Victor is kind of just sitting there with his disfigured face, with his teeth bared, with his little hands covered in dried blood out of a giant gaping hole in Charlotte's body. It's a very gruesome sort of piece of imagery, and it's very hard to talk about because I'm kind of having to tiptoe around not sounding really, really ableist, which is, it's not difficult, but I don't know what I say that could, because when was the last time I ever talked about conjoined twins? Never in my life do I talk about conjoined twins when if I'm not just talking about the twins, right? But their design is good. It is decent. I maybe add a splash of colour somewhere. I know why she's just wearing nothing but brown and beige, but I don't know. It just makes their design look a little boring. Once you get over the, shock factor per se of the conjoined twin, the design just kind of looks boring, and it just, as I've said a few times now, I went on an entire ramble about it. I just think they're a little boring, a little bit meh, and I don't think their design is doing much to help that fact. But anyways, let's move on to my favourite / least favourite cosmetics for them. Now, as I say in every single one of these videos so far, when it comes to rating my favourite and least favourite cosmetics, when it comes to least favourite, I'm not allowed to pick anything below a very rare, because if I could, I'd just pick some terrible yellow recolor and say, wow, this is so bad, guys, and call it a day, which is boring. And when it comes to favourites, I'm allowed to pick whatever the hell I want, because why not? With that said, my least favourite skin for the twins is New World Stowaway. Now, you may have heard these words before, but I think it's boring. I've said the word, take a shot every time I say boring in this video. Please don't. I don't want any of you to get alcohol poisoning. But yeah, this skin is just kind of, I don't really feel strongly about it. It's fine. It's fine. I like the idea, like, oh, they're stowaways from France, elsewhere, it's just boring. The weapon doesn't even look that cool. It just looks like a weird mishmaggled bit of rope and metal and stuff. I think a lot of the skins suffer from the issue of not changing Victor in any way, shape or form. I know people have been saying, oh, give Victor a little hat for the longest time, but sometimes I do think, yeah, it probably would help. Why would he wear clothes? No one knows. And as we know from the Houndmaster, they'll happily charge us like almost 20 quid just so we can have a different power look, right? By the way, that Houndmaster skin is not worth it, and to no one's surprise, will not be my favourite. It is definitely not going to be my favourite when we get to her. But anyways, yeah, I think New World Stowaway is just kind of boring. I don't feel very strongly about it, and you've heard those words many, many times in this video. But with that said, we move on to my favourite skin. Said favourite skin is known as Flesh and Bones. I like this skin a lot. I think it's very pretty. The twins do have a few good skins, and a lot of them usually fall into this woodland pretty category, and I think this one does that really, really well. I'm very fond of the bones all over the sort of outfit she's wearing from head to toe. I'm very fond of the sort of dried blood marks on the bones, implying that they're, like bits and pieces from prey or even like other human beings. And I'm also very fond of the fact that a lot of the bones have like moss and flowers and stuff on them. Usually when something's nature-y, like I've said this before, aquatic themed skins are always going to be my favourite, but usually anything with a nature theming to it, whether that be aquatic, grassly, that's not a word, you know what I meant. The skin, they're usually going to be my favourites, right? This skin is very pretty, very neat, and I'm quite fond of it. A close second was that that skin where she's like dressed in like the purple flowers. I think that one's also very pretty, and I'm very fond of that one as well. But yeah, we're at the end of the video now. As you can probably tell, I'm not very energetic when it comes to the twins. I'm not very interested in them. I find them quite boring. I don't have the same passion for the twins as I do like 80% of the roster. You're probably going to notice that in the upcoming next two videos, which are Trickster and Nemesis, that I'm probably going to be far more excited, energetic, because I just genuinely like those killers more. But as I said some point in this video, I don't remember when I said it, these videos are personal pieces for myself. They are how I feel about these killers. I look at certain things like perks and gameplay in an objective sense, but at the end of the day, these are my videos and these are how I feel about these killers. And unfortunately, it just so happens that twins, gameplay wise, aesthetically, they just do not interest me. I don't care. It sounds harsh, but I just really don't. And I think they're probably, if I were to pull up my list of the stat tracker thing, they'd probably be near the bottom, like play wise. I just never have cared for them. But hey ho. what can you do? Sometimes some killers just aren't for you. That's how the way works. I know there's probably some people out there who watched my blight video or watched my video on the pig and thought, wow, this guy's stupid. The blight's awful. I hate the blight. And you know what? They're fair. That's fair to think. I know I'm going to get a lot of shit for for my video on the ghoul once that eventually comes out. That's very far down the line though, so let's hold it off for a while. But anyways, I hope you have a good evening, afternoon, morning, etc. Like, comment and subscribe if you feel so inclined. And next video shall be on none other than the Trickster.